You know how you spend like half your life in a waiting room?
Yeah, though not literally, right? More like psychologically.
Exactly. I mean, you are waiting for the weekend or, waiting for the promotion, just waiting to finally feel like you've made it or that your real life has finally begun.
Right, it's that classic concept of deferred living.
Yeah, totally. We get culturally conditioned to believe that the ultimate reward or the true peace is always just over the horizon.
Which is a very safe way to live.
Yeah.
But, it's entirely passive. People end up building their entire psychological framework around the anticipation of a future event.
Rather than actually living in the present reality.
Right, exactly.
Which makes the premise of today's deep dive so disruptive. Imagine someone handing you a text that says the waiting room is, well, it's actually an illusion.
You're already sitting in the executive suite.
Right, but you're just sitting on the floor reading old magazines, completely unaware of where you actually are. So, welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission for this session is to unpack a full week of daily devotionals from a publication called Rhapsody of Realities. Specifically, we are looking at the texts spanning March 22nd to March 28th of 2026.
And our intention here is to look at these texts objectively, right? We really want to extract the core mechanics of how these devotionals operate.
Exactly. So whether you are examining these texts to deepen your own personal faith practice or, you're just a curious learner analyzing how modern religious texts construct frameworks for human resilience, this deep dive is for you.
We're going to convey the genuinely fascinating concepts layered within this specific week of writing.
Yeah, and to do that effectively, we kind of have to trace a very specific logical progression that unfolds across these 7 days.
Right, so here's the roadmap for today. We will start with a radical redefinition of personal identity.
Which is huge.
It is, and from there, we'll examine the actual mechanics of how the text claims spiritual authority works. Then, how a person is supposed to apply that power practically.
And finally, how to maintain that mindset when you're facing severe, real-world adversity.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with that radical redefinition of identity. Because before anyone can wield any kind of authority, well, they have to understand who they fundamentally are.
They do. And the readings kick off on March 22nd by basically taking a sledgehammer to that waiting room mentality we just talked about.
Yeah, the text explicitly states that the kingdom of God isn't some future destination. It asserts that you are already in it.
Right. Peace and joy are presented not as future rewards you have to earn, but as present realities, realities to be inhabited right now.
Which is a massive shift.
It really is. And the underlying logic is laid out in the text from March 23rd. It's titled The Beautiful Gospel.
Oh, right, where it contrasts the two historical figures.
Exactly. It uses Adam and Jesus to explain how this present reality is achieved. It looks at Adam's disobedience, which it argues caused a fundamental systemic separation between humanity and the divine.
Like a system error.
Yeah, basically. And then it contrasts that with Jesus' obedience. According to the text, that obedience doesn't just forgive a person, it actually makes them brand new, clean, and holy on the inside.
So it's like a complete reset of the human operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
But the devotional for March 25th is where the identity shift gets really extreme.
Oh, the part about angels.
Yes, it draws this stark, frankly fascinating distinction between angels and humans. Because, in popular culture, we usually see angels as the ultimate spiritual beings, right?
Yeah.
Hovering at the very top of the hierarchy.
Right, they're usually portrayed as the peak.
But this text argues that angels are merely palace servants. Powerful, glorious, absolutely, but fundamentally just staff.
While believers, however, are described as heirs.
Right. It says humans born of this spirit share the king's bloodline, that they actually possess the organic and existential attributes of deity.
What's fascinating here is how effectively this eliminates the psychological trap of feeling perpetually indebted.
Like a spiritual poverty mindset.
Exactly. The state of always feeling lesser than, unworthy, or like you have to constantly earn your right to exist in the room.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
By establishing that believers don't just work for the divine, but actually share the organic attributes of divinity, the texts lay the absolutely necessary foundation for the extraordinary claims of authority we see later.
Because you can't command authority if you view yourself as a peasant begging a king for favors.
Precisely.
It's sort of like discovering you aren't just an employee at a massive company hoping for a pension. You just found out you're the owner's kid with immediate equity.
Yeah, and your entire posture in the boardroom changes with that knowledge. You stop asking for permission to be there.
Totally. But this massive elevation in identity naturally forces a question. If a person possesses this king's bloodline, how does that power actualize in the real world against negative forces?
Right. The texts pivot directly from identity to the actual internal mechanics of power. Identity serves as the theory, but authority is the application.
And the text from March 23rd, Dominion over Satan, introduces a very specific mechanic regarding the antagonist.
It explicitly states that Satan is not omnipotent. He does not have all the power, which fundamentally caps the threat level of any spiritual opposition.
And it uses this incredible example to prove it. The biblical story of the demon-possessed man of Gadara.
That's a really vivid example.
It is. The text points out that this man had a legion of demons inside him. And a Roman legion was like thousands of soldiers representing massive, localized spiritual oppression.
But despite all that,
Right, when Jesus was nearby, the man physically ran toward him. The demons literally couldn't stop his physical body.
the text argues this proves that human will remains intact, regardless of external or even severe internal spiritual oppression.
Yeah, spiritual forces can manipulate, but they cannot override the fundamental human capacity to choose to seek help.
Which is a profound statement on human agency. It completely shrinks the antagonist.
It really does.
And then the text uses a highly practical modern analogy to demystify this even further. A crashed car.
Oh, I loved this part. It makes it so concrete.
Yeah, the scenario is simple. If a demonic force manipulates circumstances to cause a car crash, the car is dented.
Right, physical damage.
But a human can simply take that car to a mechanic, and human effort can hammer out the dent. The spiritual force cannot stop the physical repair.
Which takes the spooky, ethereal power of evil and reduces it to a mechanical problem that you can fix in a body shop.
Exactly. It demystifies the whole thing.
And that same demystification continues in the March 24th reading, The Gospel of Deliverance. It actively argues against the popular concept of generational curses for Christians.
Right? It treats it almost like a legal transaction.
Yeah, normally if you were born into a family line, you might inherit the debts of your ancestors. But the text states that becoming a new creature automatically breaks any demonic dominion.
Because your spiritual DNA is literally overwritten.
Exactly. Therefore, the old ancestral debts have no legal target to attach to anymore. They just bounce off because the person who supposedly owed them no longer exists in the spiritual registry.
So you don't need a special dramatic deliverance session. The new identity is the deliverance.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I was reading this and thinking, wait, so if believers have all this limitless power wired into them, and the enemy is this weak, why do so many people still struggle?
That's the logical next question, right?
Yeah. Why do people feel oppressed or defeated in their daily lives if the enemy is bound by human will and easily undone by human effort?
Well, the texts actually anticipate this exact pushback. They address it head on, primarily in the readings from March 25th and 27th, using the metaphor of electricity.
Okay, break that down for us.
Think of a house perfectly wired for power. The electricity is there, surging through the walls, available at maximum capacity. But if you do not physically walk over and flip the switch, you remain sitting in the dark.
The power is present, but it remains completely dormant.
Exactly. The text argues that the Holy Spirit is that power, but the switch is human acknowledgement and vocal declaration.
Ah, so this directly addresses the question of why people struggle.
It does. The text argues that false humility is often the culprit. Saying something like, oh, I'm just a struggling sinner, I have no power, only God does, might sound very pious and religious, right?
Yeah, it sounds like what you're supposed to say.
But it is fundamentally wrong according to their framework. It actually short-circuits the power.
Wow. Wait, really?
Yeah. The logic is that the divine gave the power to the believer. Therefore, denying you have it means you cannot use it.
Because thoughts are just internal potential, but spoken words are externalized reality.
Right. Vocal declaration forces the believer to physically align their body, their vocal cords, their breath with their supposed belief. It creates cognitive congruence.
And it isn't just verbal declaration, right? Physical actions matter too.
Yeah.
The March 25th text talks about lifting hands in prayer.
Yes, and it insists this isn't just a traditional religious gesture, it's actually a spiritual signal of victory.
Right, it compares it to Moses lifting his hands to ensure Israel's military victory against Amalek, or the prophet Elisha telling a king to shoot an arrow out a window as a prophetic act.
Which synthesizes a very empowering psychological truth. Limitless power is entirely useless without human will, vocal declaration, and physical affirmation.
The texts demand active, embodied participation.
You cannot be a passive vessel hoping the divine just does everything for you while you sit in the waiting room.
So if you flip the switch, activated this internal power, and stepped out of the waiting room, the obvious question becomes, well, to what end?
Right, what's the point of it all?
Exactly. You aren't given a king's bloodline just to sit comfortably in your living room. The devotionals make a very sharp pivot here, from personal empowerment to collective external responsibility.
The focus shifts entirely outward. The March 24th reading introduces a fantastic conceptual term for this: protagonism.
Protagonism, like being a protagonist for the gospel.
Yeah, and we typically think of a protagonist as simply the main character in a movie, but the root of the word implies being the primary driver of the action, the one who actually advances the plot.
The text uses the metaphor of a relay race. It points out that if one runner runs a brilliant leg, but then keeps the baton to themselves, the entire team loses.
Right, it cites the biblical examples of Andrew finding Peter and Philip finding Nathaniel.
To emphasize that the moment you receive the good news, you are immediately deputized as an ambassador. You have to pass the baton to the next person.
And the March 26th text scales this concept up using the metaphor of a human body. It states that if a toe is injured, the whole body limps.
Meaning every single individual, no matter how seemingly insignificant their daily life might feel, has a vital role in building the overall structure of the church.
Exactly. They work right alongside established leadership structures like teachers and pastors under the fivefold ministry. Nobody is exempt from the mission.
This intense outward focus completely redefines the concept of wealth, too, which we see in the March 27th reading about true riches.
Ah, yes, the parable of the rich fool.
Right. This is the story of a guy who had such a massive bumper crop, a truly incredible harvest, that instead of sharing it, his solution was to tear down his existing infrastructure, just to build bigger barns to hoard it all for himself.
And the text completely flips the script on what it means to be wealthy. It views hoarding not as prudent financial savings, but as a catastrophic misunderstanding of the assignment.
It says true riches actually mean utilizing your time and your money to support the kingdom's work.
Because, as the text notes by referencing the fowls of the air, the divine has already sorted out your basic needs. Therefore, material anxiety is basically a waste of your cognitive resources.
So what does this all mean? When I was looking at this framework of everyone passing the baton and utilizing their own resources for a larger network, it sounded almost like a spiritual gig economy.
Oh, that's an interesting way to frame it.
Yeah, everyone is kind of an independent contractor. You have your own specific sphere of influence,
Right.
your own neighborhood, your workplace, your specific friend group, but you are all distributing goods for the exact same massive global network.
You aren't meant to just sit in the warehouse enjoying the inventory. You're meant to be out making deliveries.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how radically this flips standard human ambition. I mean, society trains us that success is the accumulation of resources.
We are constantly told to build bigger barns, secure the bag, protect our assets.
But these texts urge the reader to distribute them. Passing the relay baton is the metric of success. It reframes material anxiety and the relentless pursuit of wealth as a mere distraction from one's true global mandate.
It tells you that worrying about what you're going to eat or what brand you're going to wear is, well, it's beneath your new identity. You have an actual world to change.
But of course, stepping out and actively trying to change the world, operating as a protagonist, is going to inevitably invite severe resistance.
Right. A framework like this would be incredibly fragile if it didn't address the reality of hardship.
Absolutely, because if you are told you have the bloodline of a king and limitless internal power, the very first time you get a flat tire or a project fails or someone mocks you, you might immediately conclude that the entire system is broken.
And the devotionals tackle this friction head on. The March 23rd text, Facing Giants with God's Strength, uses a great modern analogy. It talks about an athlete who signs up for a marathon.
Right, and people look at him, decide he doesn't have the right build for it, and actively laugh at him.
Yeah, they tell him to quit before he embarrasses himself. But actually, looking at the text from the 23rd, the biblical detail that stood out to me the most wasn't even the giant Goliath. It was David's older brother, Eliab.
Oh, yeah, the dynamic there is fascinating.
It is. The text connects the marathon runner analogy to young David bringing cheese and bread to the front lines. Eliab, the hardened veteran soldier, looks down on his younger brother and viciously mocks his motives,
He accuses David of having a wicked, arrogant heart.
essentially saying, You just came down here to watch the battle, you arrogant kid. David could have stopped right there to defend his honor. He could have argued with his brother to prove the purity of his heart.
But he doesn't.
No. The text notes that David simply turned away. He ignored the cynicism, focused entirely on the mission, and ultimately defeated Goliath.
That is a profound lesson in focus and energy conservation. I mean, we spend immense amounts of our daily energy trying to win arguments, often in online comment sections, or desperately defending our motives to cynics who have already decided they misunderstand us.
In our current era of information overload, isn't there something universally brilliant about David's strategy here?
Just doing the work.
Exactly. Just do the work. Let the undeniable victory silence the cynics. If you stop to debate every Eliab you meet, Goliath remains undefeated.
You preserve your power by refusing to engage in battles that do not advance the mission.
And the final text we are analyzing, for March 28th, The Glory Beyond the Fire, takes this concept of facing adversity to its absolute ultimate conclusion.
It fully acknowledges that laboring in this mission does not guarantee a smooth, frictionless life.
It brings up the famous story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three young men who faced a literal blazing fiery furnace because they absolutely refused to compromise their convictions.
And the crucial theological distinction outlined in the text isn't the absence of challenges. The text specifically emphasizes that the divine didn't promise there would be no tempest or fire.
The promise, rather, is the absolute assurance of a protective presence right in the middle of the adversity.
Right.
Which means these texts absolutely do not promote toxic positivity. They don't try to gaslight the reader into pretending bad things don't happen, or that feeling the heat of the fire means you somehow lack faith or flip the switch incorrectly.
Instead, they completely reframe the purpose of adversity. Whether it is the subtle, biting mockery of a sibling like Eliab, or the existential, life-threatening threat of a literal fiery furnace.
Adversity is presented as a necessary proving ground.
It is the very environment where the identity, the authority, and the active protagonism we discussed earlier are actually forged, tested, and proven to be real.
Because you cannot prove you have power over the fire until you were forced to walk through it.
It is the gym where the spiritual muscles actually get built.
Man, that's powerful. So let's do a quick recap of the journey we've taken through these texts today. We started with the realization that you are an heir with a king's bloodline, effectively discarding the illusion of the waiting room mentality.
Right. And then we learned about the mechanics of authority, how human will caps spiritual oppression, and the necessity of flipping the switch on your internal spiritual electricity through vocal declaration and physical action.
Then we explored taking on the role of a protagonist, recognizing your responsibility to pass the baton, rather than hoarding your wealth in bigger barns.
And finally, we looked at walking through the fire and doing the actual work without stopping to waste energy arguing with the cynics along the way.
It truly is a highly cohesive, robust system of thought that connects internal identity directly to external action. And that is exactly why this matters to you, the listener.
Absolutely.
Whether you apply these texts as absolute theological truth in your own daily life, or you are simply studying them as a fascinating psychological framework, they offer a masterclass in discarding a victim mentality.
They force you to recognize your inherent, unshakable worth, to stop attributing omnipotence to the obstacles in your way, and to take decisive, active protagonism in whatever your personal sphere of influence happens to be.
Yeah, that sums it up perfectly.
It does raise an important question, though, and I want to leave you with one last concept to mull over on your own.
Oh, definitely. Lay it on us.
These texts heavily emphasize that a believer's true power remains dormant until it is vocally acknowledged. So it raises a profound question.
Okay.
Even outside of a spiritual context, how much of our own human potential remains locked away simply because we are too afraid to boldly declare what we are actually capable of?
Oh, wow. That is a great point.
I mean, if we look at the modern obsession with hustle culture, the prevailing narrative is that your worth is something you have to grind out day by day. You are constantly told to prove your value to the world through your output.
But these texts offer the exact opposite framework.
Exactly. They claim your highest possible value, your king's bloodline, and your inheritance are already absolute facts. Your work should flow from that established worth, not be an exhausted attempt to earn it.
It makes you wonder how differently we would operate in our careers, our passions, and our relationships if we started every morning from a baseline of absolute security,
Right.
rather than a baseline of constantly trying to prove we belong in the room.
Because you can't truly own the executive suite if you're still acting like an intern hoping to get hired. Something to think about.
It absolutely is. Well, thanks for joining us on this